now.
Wow.
Hey folks, we're just giving everybody a few seconds to get logged in before we dive into things. If you are already logged in, you can find some information in the chat about how to buy tonight's featured book and how to get 15% off before June 16th with a coupon code. So check the chat for that info. Great. Good evening and welcome to tonight's live online author event with Greenlight Bookstore. We're excited to host tonight's event with Zaina Arafat, launching her new book, You Exist Too Much. She'll be talking with Mallika Rao, so you're in for an excellent time. Before we start, I just want to say a huge thanks to everyone for making this happen and to all of you for showing up. Greenlight storefronts are currently closed and locked, but our community is still here. Now, just a couple of housekeeping things. First, you can see and hear the speakers, but they cannot see or hear you. They will be able to see your name over in our attendee list, and they'll see your name when you comment in chat or ask questions in our audience Q&A. There's a couple of Zoom functions we'll be using throughout the event that you'll see if you scroll over the bottom of your Zoom window. One of these is an icon labeled chat. You can comment in here at any time throughout the event to say hello to the authors or your fellow attendees, comment on any part of the conversation, provide applause after the reading or during any particular high points in the conversation. You'll also see an icon at the bottom of your Zoom window labeled Q&A. This is where we'll be pulling questions from during the audience Q&A portion towards the end of our event. You can type your questions in there at any point throughout tonight's conversation. And if you see someone else's question in the Q&A window that you would really like to hear answered, you can go ahead and upvote that, and the questions with the most likes will float to the top of our queue as we're pulling questions to ask Zaina. We are recording tonight's event, so look for video or audio versions on our website and social channels later on. And tonight's featured book, You Exist Too Much, is available for sale from greenlightbookstore.com. Though our stores are closed, we're working with our supplier warehouse for fast direct-to-home shipping. If you care about supporting the careers of authors and the ongoing existence of independent bookstores, purchasing tonight's featured book is a great way to show your support. And we're offering 15% off on the featured book when you purchase it from Greenlight's website in the next week. Look for that coupon code in the chat. Our interviewer for this evening is Mallika Rao. She is a writer of essays, criticism, and fiction. Her work, digital and print, can be found at the New York Times, New York Magazine, Believer Magazine, Catapult, and The Atlantic, where she's a regular contributor to the digital culture page. She'll be speaking with our featured author, Zaina Arafat. She is a Palestinian-American writer. Her stories and essays have appeared in publications including the New York Times, Granta, The Believer, Virginia Quarterly Review, The Washington Post, The Atlantic, BuzzFeed, Vice, and NPR. She holds an MA in International Affairs from Columbia University and an MFA from the University of Iowa, and is a recipient of the Arab Women Migrants from the Middle East Fellowship at Jack Jones Literary Arts. She grew up between the United States and the Middle East and currently lives in Brooklyn. Her new book, You Exist Too Much, is a captivating debut, opening up the fantasies and desires of one young woman caught between cultural, religious, and sexual identities, and charting two of our most intense longings, for love and a place to call home. Zaina is going to start us off with a reading from the book, and then she'll be talking with Mallika and with all of you. Zaina, please take it away.
Hi, it's so nice to I can't see you, but I'm so happy you're here. It means a lot, and I'm just really excited to spend this launch with you, with all of you. Okay, so I'm gonna read for about four-ish minutes from the very first pages of the book. So here goes. Okay. In Bethlehem, when I was 12, men in airy white gowns sat at a three-legged table outside the Church of the Nativity. They ran prayer beads through their fingers and sipped mint tea in gold-rimmed cups shaped like hourglasses, steam floating off the surface and up into the bright blue sky. I walked past them with my mother and my uncle as we wandered through the holy city. One of the men called out, "Haram," forbidden. For the especially devout among us, it's haram to eat meat unless the animal has been killed in a specific way. Haram to drink alcohol. Haram for a pubescent girl to expose her legs in a biblical city. It occurred to me then that I wasn't a flat-chested kid anymore, that curves had begun to appear along the length of me. I was no longer indistinguishable from a boy child. What should we do? I asked my mother. I felt a pulsing lump take shape in my throat as I noticed her jaw extended and temples shimmering. My great-grandparents' house was where we were staying and where all of my clothes were, 36 miles and 3 checkpoints away. I should have had more sense than to dress in such a way when we were visiting the birthplace of a prophet, albeit not our own. My mother had and still has a native's knowledge. She knows the rules instinctively in that part of the world, and I only ever learned them by accident. "Basita," said my uncle, "it's okay." We approached the main door of the church and the men hissed again. My uncle ran the tips of his fingers across his mustache, then looked to my mother and me. "Come," he said, "I have an idea." We followed him into a gift shop just off Mandras Square. He dropped a few coins on the counter, then asked the shopkeeper if we could use his bathroom. My mother grabbed a Kit Kat off the shelf and tore it open, breaking apart 2 sticks without a second thought. My uncle dropped 3 more coins on the counter. The man pointed towards the back. My uncle thanked him and led the way. His master plan was that he would trade me his trousers for my Roxy surfer shorts. He went into the bathroom first, and I could hear sounds of fumbling, his belt jangling as it hit the floor. He opened the door slightly and handed his pants to my mother so she could administer the swap. She then stood in front of me while I took off my shorts. "Yalla," she said, her most frequently used word. "Hurry." I pulled on the pair of pants. They sagged on me. I had to tighten the belt buckle all the way up to the last hole and then roll the waist so that they wouldn't fall off, leaving me even more exposed than I had been before. I stepped out of the bathroom and looked at my uncle. I examined my new curves against his pasty legs, gangly and covered in sporadic patches of hair, my shorts tight against his thighs. It occurred to me in that moment to question why, as a man, his bare legs were somehow less troubling than mine. It was a double standard, a shame I had simply accepted until then. In acquiring my gender, I had become offensive. But as I stood in front of him, an unexpected pride began to swell inside me. I liked the way his trousers made me feel, like I could get attention from boys, from girls. I felt, for once, seen. "Inti walad wala binat?" Are you a boy or a girl? A security guard at the Intercontinental Hotel in Amman had once asked my cousin Noor this question when deciding whether to lead her into the curtain-shrouded women's check for an intimate pat-down before she could enter the lobby. "Binit," Noor had responded. "Girl." She'd been insulted by the question, the uncertainty it revealed. But not me, not that day. Wearing my uncle's baggy trousers, I enjoyed occupying blurred lines. Ambiguity was an unsettling yet exhilarating space. Thank you.
Thank you, Zaina. I was so happy when you told me you were going to read this passage, this opening scene, because it was one I wanted to talk about anyways. I feel like there's so much happening in there that sets the stage for the rest of the book. There's the setting, there's the character's sense of dislocation in the setting, as well as comfort. And then there's the interaction with her mother. There's sort of several dimensions to the interaction with her mother in that scene, that set the stage for the friction between them as well as the attraction between them. And then, of course, there's the experience with the shorts and what that kind of, the ambiguity and power of that revelation that the character has. So I'm wondering how you came up with that scene. It feels so perfectly encasing of everything. And if you can sort of go into the anatomy of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that, the anatomy of the scene, like in the Times.
Yes.
Yeah, I love it. So, and I like talking about it. So the scene was, okay, by the way, I close my eyes a lot when I talk. And if you're one of my students here, you know that already. The scene was developed in such a way because I felt that it, and served as the opening of the book, because it did encapsulate so many of the tensions that are running through the entire novel. Like the sort of awkwardness and humor and discomfort of cultural in-betweenness, right? And the, nuances of that, like not knowing something, that a native Palestinian would know, which is, or a Palestinian who is, who has grown up in Palestine versus predominantly in the diaspora. They would know you don't wear shorts,
Right.
even if you're 12 years old, especially to, a holy site. And the sort of, just the pain, I guess, which is often tinged with humor, which it's meant to be in the scene, of that lack of understanding and that sort of lack of access. At the same time, the scene also gets into some of the sexual components of this book and the narrator's in-betweenness in that realm as well, which is one of the main tensions, especially when juxtaposed against her Palestinian heritage. And it also encapsulates the dynamic with the mother, and just sort of the way that the daughter looks to the mother as, as someone who has an innate understanding of that part of the world by virtue of having grown up there, and who, the daughter looks to for guidance in those ways. And I think the scene itself and just the sort of way that it unfolds and, the shorts, I just thought that I wanted to take all of those tensions and make them funny. And to present them in a light way to begin, but to also have, undercurrents of depth. And so, that was really important to me actually throughout the novel, was that for all of those tensions and all of those themes to also have levity to them. I had a professor, Jeff Dyer actually, who once said to me, like, pain in writing is hilarious. And that really stuck with me, because I do think that pain should be rendered, oftentimes pain in writing can and should be funny, right? Because we want to sort of process it through that paradigm of humor. But anyway, so that's where the scene derives from.
That's yeah, it's so clever. To the shorts are such a clever tool, because they do sort of bridge the awkwardness. I mean, I experienced that in India as a little girl, the shorts issue, and then how they can turn into a masculine kind of costume.
Right. And yeah, and just to say that, of course, I mean, like, that happened to me, Zaina, right, as well, where shorts were, or things of that nature, where I just, like, certain items of clothing that I didn't know, because here it was okay. So,
Right.
so yeah.
The other aspect I think it's a good segue that of the book in general that I think this scene kind of foreshadows is how delicately you're navigating these territories that are very easily um, kind of like stomped through. So in terms of identity, particularly place, I was just really impressed, as I've told you, going through the book, at the light hand that you have throughout in drawing this character and her longings without without sliding into kind of easy phrases or frameworks that I think, given how charged the atmosphere is these days around identity, specifically queer identity, Muslim identity, Arab identity. I'm interested in whether you consciously resisted some ways of thinking when you were writing easy ways of thinking, and how you did that, because it seems like it would be a difficult thing to do today.
Yeah, I mean, so it is a difficult thing to do, and it's a careful line, I think, to walk, because so for me, what brought me to this character in this story was largely a desire to subvert certain dominant and what I felt were reductive narratives about, let's start with like Arabs and Muslims, that's, portrayed Arabs and Muslims in, I don't want to say that it was always a prejudiced narrative, but one that was very limited to like certain stock images, including, like rock throwing and like coffins that were, being carried down the street, and just like all sorts of images that were steeped in violence, as well as, they I think portrayed Arabs as being kind of, just almost primitive and oppressive, and just all these things that were not the experiences that I had myself as a Palestinian-American, but also as someone watching my family anytime I was in Palestine and in Lebanon and in Jordan and in the Middle East. I mean, that was the images that you saw and the stories that you heard in the States were very different than the reality. And so in that sense, I just wanted to, as much as I could, I really genuinely wanted to like subvert that narrative and to offer something different, something more like normal, I guess, and not as sensational, and not something that could sort of slide in a way that made it seem like any other story almost, right, while also like attaching to its cultural references and characters that are Arab and Muslim. And also like taking a lot of the heaviness away from like just the like idea of Arabs and Muslim that seemed to be like dominating the media. So yeah, and similarly for like, queerness as well. We have certain, or at least not everybody, but there are many common kind of tropes of what that looks like. And I wanted to subvert those tropes as well, also in the same way, by like challenging the, I guess, stereotypes, and also just sort of creating a human character and human characters who could, who weren't othered, basically. So I think that was really important to me. And why do I say it's a careful, a difficult line to walk? It's because at the same time, you want to do, you do want to, there is an expectation, I guess, when you have like Palestinian characters or queer characters, that you also do want to show some of the like realities of that experience that maybe are less, that are more difficult to present, while also wanting to really preserve that mission of subverting the stereotypes and the dominant narratives. So I thought a lot about that, and I did, while there were a lot of feedback I got was basically to say, like, hey, can you perpetuate the narrative I have in my head and the way that I want to see Arabs and Muslims represented, or the way that I want to see queer people represented? And I always resisted that. And the team I ended up working with, like my agent, my editor, and my whole, like, everyone basically at Catapult, like, they all totally seemed to get that. They all got that. And I really, in the end, like, that was just really, really important to me. So yeah.
It's interesting because I think there's almost like two poles of a dominant narrative, and there's one that's sort of older maybe, and then there's also a newer one that I think is like maybe like a woke narrative that can also feel confining because it's popular. And I think your book, it manages to avoid both sort of, broad strokes areas very well.
I love that you said that, because I think that's true, where it's like, it's not totally, right. It's like retaining both the sort of old, I guess, respecting also just like the older traditions also of like a culture, and kind of bringing in the newer realities, I guess, of the newer generation within those cultures.
Right. Well, there doesn't feel like there's an agenda, or there's a kind of, I don't know. It doesn't. It feels removed from the discourse in a lot of ways, and yet, of course, it's like so of the discourse. It feels very natural to me. And we spoke earlier about one of the dynamics I think you tease out so well that I haven't seen done really, is the kind of the conflicted loyalties of a character in this position who is of, two worlds in between a liminal state, and who actually is not totally averse to kind of an old world mentality, which at times can be destructive, demeaning, abusive. And given that she's queer, is actually in the novel, it's an antithetical, oppositional force. And then she has loyalties to that. And then she's of the new world, of the kind of, modern progressive society, but she's wrestling with these conflicted loyalties. And you and I have talked personally about our own conflicted loyalties in terms of like loving our parents, but also, seeing issues with certain belief systems, but then seeing the wisdom in them as well. And how, if that comes at a cost to your own mental health or your own self-expression, like what do you do about that? Maybe you don't get into the new, liberal world either.
I think that's right. And I do think that one of, like, I guess one of the tensions in the book is between like the immigrant generation and the first generation. And I think the first generation, we know it gets, you want to you grow up in that culture because your parents are bringing it to you. And yet you're also growing up in this culture. And so you want that culture that you grew up with, and you understand it in many ways, and you respect it, even when it doesn't, isn't progressing at the same rate as the adopted culture, I guess. And I do think that that's something that this character and, even I myself have grappled with, is exactly that, what you're saying.
Yeah, well, so the book is bookended by, I don't want to give too much away, but it's bookended in such a way that you begin to understand that her relationship with her mother is very central in terms of understanding her relationships with everyone, with lovers. And so it's a romantic relationship all its own. And I think that I know that in an interview with the Rumpus last month, you talked about kind of weaving together these threads of longing for a country, longing for a parent, longing for a lover. And I guess I'm interested in that sort of how you sort of conceived of the larger framework, if there was a structure for you, metaphorical structure.
Yeah, the larger framework is in like those longings.
Yeah, how the longings interconnect.
Yeah, I think, let me think for 1 second. I think that so I think that for me, they all sort of were, they were all like different pots on a stove, all sort of simmering. And then like, as I wrote the story, they all started to boil, and one boiled faster than the others, which was the relationship with the mother. So let me say that less metaphorically. I mean, I think that as I was tracing the relationship in the novel with the mother, I was also tracing, I was realizing that the way that this character longs for her mother is the way that it is because the mother feels so unattainable to the narrator. Because the mother is from a different world, right? She is in many ways, for this narrator, the embodiment of like the Middle East, and Palestine specifically is a place that this narrator wants so much to belong to. And so in that way, you know, she wants that belonging to her mother. And I think that the stories, the love stories that grew around it, they all take similar shapes in the sense that they're all she sets her sights on unattainable people. And she keeps repeating this pattern because the central relationship in her life, you know, the one with her mother, is that way as well, right? It's and so when I was, that's how I conceived of like that first level, you know, the longing in love. And then I think that I guess that the longing, when it came to, you know, the cultural longing and the like longing for home and the longing for like country and all of that came through the process of writing that first level, and also just like kind of stepping away at times and really reflecting on the ideas that were running through the book, and realizing that this character's whole life in all of those realms is based around longing, because, you know, as a Palestinian, of course, you know, you're constantly, this Palestinian state is an unattainable thing. And it's something that Palestinians have longed for, you know, 70 plus years. And it's even stronger, I think, or it's not, I mean, I shouldn't say it's even stronger, but it's strong when you're in a diaspora as well, because why do diasporas form? You know, they form for a reason. And I think in the case of the Palestinian diaspora, it's especially fraught because you don't even have like a home country that you feel you can ever really return to, as many Palestinians that are refugees or exiles feel as well. So yeah, it all just seemed to correspond around, or to center around, unattainability and longing.
Yeah, and I'm realizing now bisexuality is such an apt, also metaphoric kind of state. It's a liminal state. It's misunderstood. It's kind of, you know, neither here nor there. And I loved also the delicacy with which you handled that, the kind of the thought process around her bisexuality. There's a line where she says, "Isn't everyone these days," you know, meaning bisexual to someone. And it's such a subversive, has been used often in describing the novel, and it's such a subversion of, that's often the sort of the refrain of people who don't get it, right? That it's a phase, that it's just like affectation. But then she's using it, and there's something there. I just found something so powerful in her saying that. It didn't feel dismissive. It felt very rooted in the moment. I don't know. Was that a line you thought about?
You know, what I'm trying to remember that line exactly, but I know, like when I hear you say it, and I did, yeah, I wrote it. It came from, I think it comes from this narrator's. So this narrator has shame about the fact that she has shame, And that line, right? It's like she's trying to kind of convince herself that like, why do I have so much shame, I think, around this when, who isn't these days?
Right. And I think, again, that's these warring cultures of like East Coast intelligentsia telling you shame is bad. You should feel proud.
Right.
And then, and then her mother and her loyalties to her mother. There's another line where her grandfather, this is sort of she's telling a history of her mother's marriage, and her grandfather had the insight that she shouldn't marry the man that she does marry. That's his daughter, because he rents a red convertible, and any man who rents a red convertible has an inferiority complex. And I thought I laughed at that line because it is like, there's so much like brute wisdom in it. And it felt very representative to me of what we've talked about, of this kind of the wisdom of our elders that can sound really dismissive and, and old fashioned, but there's something to it. And so the competing loyalties that she has in owning her bisexuality, or, in negotiating the shame, I think is really well drawn.
I love that you pointed to that, because that's exactly right. Like, now someone would critique that. Like, if someone said that in a mod, they'd be like shut down if they tweeted that, or
Exactly.
But it's kind of true. It's like, it's actually a pretty good point. Like, why would you? So, and in the same way as you just said, like, right, it's almost shameful because you can't explain, or it's hard to explain how much these traditions, like when you have this other culture, how rooted they are in you. And how much tension they create, because you're in a place where it's like, what's the big deal, And so, I mean, there are still not easy for anybody, I think, but at the same time, like, it's further complicated in this case by that cultural dimension. So
I think that's what I felt so moved by reading the book. I'm second gen. My parents are Indian immigrants. I have always felt it's not just in conflict with India and America, or brown and white. It's actually in conflict with the choices that I make, and the choices that my parents made, or being in New York, being part of a society that feels antithetical to my home.
Yeah.
Right.
And understanding that yourself as well.
Yeah, but I think that's this word gets overused, but it's very brave to I don't know, to have gotten into the nuance there. There's a character, Iman, I think, I don't know if that's the correct pronunciation.
Yeah.
I found her really fascinating. She kind of lectures on chastity, on the virtue of staying a virgin until you're married, and then while our main character is struggling throughout the time we see her with affection and love and finding security, Iman finds it. She gets married. But then at the wedding, it turns out she wasn't a virgin. So I feel like there was so much in there in terms of the girl who did the right thing gets the prize, but then she wasn't even doing the right thing. And then when you're sort of actively going against it, visibly going against it, you're punished in a way. I don't know if it seemed like she was almost a bit player, but it seemed like there was a lot there.
Yeah, that's I love what you're saying. Totally. Because it's exactly as you say, it's the visibility factor. Because I think I'll just speak for my own culture, but like in Arab culture, like appearance matters a lot, and so do the opinions of other people. Not to say that they don't matter here as well, but they do matter in Arab Palestinian culture. And so that's, you're given a pass, you can sort of do what you want in a way, as long as you like purport to uphold certain values and certain behaviors. And it's almost, there's this, here we have this idea of like living out loud, right? And like, you should, be proud of who you are. And I love that. And I embrace that. But there it's like, can't you just be yourself quieter? Which in a way, this narrator, like, she's not rebellious. She doesn't totally reject that is part of her problem, right? She kind of is
Exactly.
trying to adhere to that, but is also like being pulled by this idea of like, live out loud.
Exactly. She hasn't bought all in. And I think there's a cost to living out loud. I think so often it's like a slogan, it's like a motto, the American dream,
Yeah.
But the American dream comes in all different sort of flavors. And there's one that's about, full expression of the self. And then there is a cost. There's a social cost. There's a cost to family. And you really feel the costs here.
Yeah.
She feels the costs.
Yeah, there is a cost. There's such a cost, right? Especially for this character. Yeah.
Yeah. I loved, there's a passage where she's describing her summers, that there's a point every summer when she's in Jordan when she misses America. It comes like clockwork. And the description of what she misses is so great. I'm just going to read it. I'd make a list in my journal of things I missed about the States: peanut butter, cow's milk, Nickelodeon, grass, Heather, my next door neighbor and best friend. From a distance, the US seemed so beautiful, so welcoming, so easy. And then she gets home and very quickly the sensation goes away. And I love that passage. I related deeply to it. I remember feeling that way in the summers. But then again, it was such a perfect metaphorical construct for the longing theme. But really also the discontent, that this is a person who's never content. And I think that was something that even beyond culture and place, that's something I feel like is haunting a lot of people romantically these days, that there's a sense of constant, I could always be doing better, dissatisfaction, I should be somewhere else, grass is greener. That seems like a plague. I mean, it just seems like it's everywhere. I don't know. If that's something you were, thinking of commenting on, was more largely like the dating scene and love scene.
I mean, totally. So that those lines that you just referenced and that you just read, which I love that you read them. I mean, that's supposed to echo out basically, because exactly, like the character is always longing for what's not there, right? What she doesn't have, what's off in the distance. Like when she's in the Middle East, she's longing for the US. When she's in the US, she's longing for the Middle East. And it's the same with romance in the novel, and the way that she sets her sights on what she doesn't have in love as well, until she doesn't. But that's her struggle through both on that romantic level and on that cultural level as well. And even in in a family, in the sense of family as well. It's like she does that there too. And I think I really wanted to investigate why people do that, like, right? Like, why would somebody do that? Why would somebody have that, I guess grass is greener mentality all the time? And I think that's what the book is investigating. Like, that's one of the questions. It's like, why? Why is there always this longing for the other thing? And I think what you read is kind of, yeah, go ahead. No, actually, I don't want to say anymore. So
in the Rumpus interview, you mentioned 19th century philosophical texts that you were reading originally that kind of gave rise and then were sort of taken out, and it became just a book that was inspired by that. What were the texts? I was interested in.
Yeah, I just funny because I just got a box out of storage that has all of them, or a lot of them. So they were, I was reading Kierkegaard, Sickness Unto Death, Concluding Unscientific Postscript, Fear and Trembling. So a lot of Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, a lot of like Thus Spoke Zarathustra, The Gay Science, various other texts. And then, I mean, those two primarily, like, and that was a question that that was something that question is something that Kierkegaard actually poses. Kierkegaard struggles himself with a lot of this, which is very interesting. I've like read his whole biography and just watched movies about his life, and he has so much torment for this exact same reason. And I always found that so interesting, because like he lived in the 19th century, and it seems like such a like 20th to 21st century problem. But yeah. So I mean, I was reading all these texts because I was a philosophy major, and I just loved philosophy and the ideas. I mean, in many ways, the book is a really, I think, idea-based.
Very conceptual.
Yeah, think of it as conceptual, right? And I tried to locate it. Well, I located it in these narratives that were more relevant to things that I cared about, like culture and, you know.
Right. But it's really exploring these kind of, long-standing riddles that will never be solved.
Right.
I think it's time to, or is it, maybe we have a couple more minutes. Oh no, we have a couple more minutes. I'm getting some of the little notes that people are writing are they're good. They're great.
I can see it. That's why I keep laughing. I don't just normally laugh like this.
I know. So yeah, this is also from that interview. I was intrigued by this. This is something you said. Something I'm at once trying to do and at once trying to resist doing is to give voice to characters from Arab backgrounds, and to not only three-dimensionalize them, but also to subversively thwart misperceptions and stereotypes. The first half of that, I was like, you're trying to do it and to resist doing it. I wanted you to explain that to me.
What did I say? I wanted to resist.
Something I'm at once trying to do and at once trying to resist doing is to give voice to characters from Arab backgrounds. I don't know if yeah.
I think what I meant to say was trying to do and trying to resist was to give voices to Arab characters. I think it's part of that desire to sneak them in a way, like as if you're feeding a kid broccoli by putting it in mashed potatoes, sort of thing, where it was like, these characters seem really normal, normal. I mean, Arabs are normal, but or they just seem familiar. They seem familiar, but they also happen to be, as it happens, they're Arab, Muslim, Palestinian, so that was something. But also the other thing is that there is this pressure or this expectation almost that you are representing, Palestinians anytime you write a character that happens to have that identity, or you're representing bisexual people anytime you create a bisexual character. And it's like, no, this is not about representation at all. This is just a story, and
she does not feel representative to me. She feels like very much a character rooted in her particular circumstances, which we learn a lot about.
Yeah, and she's very messy. Her what?
Her memories in particular.
Yeah, yes, her memories.
They're so personal. They're only hers, they can't be representative.
Right. And she is very messy. So intersecting and overlapping, and none of it's reconciled.
Natural is really what I felt reading it. It just feels very natural. Yeah. And I think, I think it's time. We are going to open it up to questions from the audience. So you can keep throwing questions into the Q&A, and I will ask them of Zaina. Okay, here we go. Did you feel that you had to actively work to keep the novel from tilting toward the mother, Layla, who was clearly a very magnetic personality? That's such a good question.
It's an excellent question. Yes, I kind of did, actually, because, it's interesting. Hang on. Yes, I did have to work towards the novel tilting in that direction, because I was really interested in Layla as a character. And yeah, I mean, she is the reader, I find, is left wanting more of Layla.
Layla's, yeah.
And I think that mimics in many ways this character's feelings as well, where she's always wanting more of the mother, and she's not available entirely. She's not available. And so I really did want to mimic that in the in the book, right? To have her be, I mean, because she would lose, I think Layla would lose some of her magic almost, or her appeal, if we got too much of her. So she's meant to be kind of in doses. And I wanted to also really focus on the like relationship between Layla and the narrator as well, and to have it not be like or to have her be just big enough that we could have room for the relationship.
That's interesting, because it's like in the kind of psychological literature around, love addiction, which is a major component of the book that you explore, and general like addictive tendencies. There's the sort of, seeing the desired object as it's a fantasy, right? And Layla is not fully real, right, in the way the narrator is.
Yeah, and it's and you see her through the narrator's eyes, and I'm hoping there's a slight awareness that we're seeing her through the narrator's eyes, and that she's like kind of glorified, because we are seeing other actions that contradict that glorified view. So that's it.
Very good question. Let's keep going here. This is congratulations from Aman. This is Seema. What was the most gratifying thing to you about writing this book?
Oh, nothing. No, I'm just kidding. There was, I'll tell you, the answer to the question is the most gratifying thing, I guess, about writing the book is the moments when you have a breakthrough, where you see, like, for example, just seeing like, oh my goodness, this character's longing is so deep rooted in her identity as a Palestinian that like it explains so much of her other longings. And it's like to make that connection and then to translate it into the text and to like, put it into the book, and to try and do so in a way that made it feel organic. Like that kind of moment, that epiphany, is a really gratifying moment. More so, almost, like, I think the most gratifying moments of the book come with the writing of the book, and the craft of it and figuring out the structure. And I mean, when I was writing it, I had pages taped to my wall because it has a really kind of a, I don't know, non-linear, unusual structure, and just sorting them out and figuring out what went where. And when I could figure it out, those are the best moments. Those are the most gratifying moments, and of course, like, the steps along the way to bringing it into the world are also very gratifying. So yeah, getting good edits are really gratifying, to be honest, especially ones that you really agree with. So yeah.
Can I ask, do you remember when you wrote the passage that tells us the story of Layla? Because as I told you, that section just like, it just blew off the page for me.
Thank you. Later, I remember that being really painful and it was just hard to write that section, because it would involve accessing a character who was so inaccessible. And so it was difficult to write, and I think, and to do justice to her as well. And I wrote it later in the process of writing the book. It came later. Yeah.
Let's keep going here. How do you feel about the Palestinian society that put women on a pedestal as resistant and family and memory holder, while at the same time send them all to tradition and conservative views? So the duality of the Palestinian woman in society, Palestinian society.
Sorry, can you?
I can read that again.
Okay.
How do you feel about Palestinian society that puts women on a pedestal as family memory holder?
Yeah.
While at the same time send them all the time to tradition and conservative views. So I'm thinking it's like, she's both confined and also elevated.
I don't know, actually. I think my brain is having trouble understanding the question, but I think that's the question, right? Or that's one of the, like, there are contradictions and like tensions that she's trying to like navigate, and they don't always get reconciled, and like the trying to do both of those things is where the tension lies. So
Okay, that's great. Zaina, your book affected me and held a mirror up to so many of my own experiences as a queer woman, and I found myself triple checking that it was in fact fiction and not memoir. I'm curious how much of the book is based on your own experiences.
It's fiction. It's a novel. It's a novel. It's fiction. But I will say that so while the stories themselves in the book are fictional, like in the sense that, imagined, I would say that what's, the primary aspects of the book that derive from life are those identity markers, right? Like the being Palestinian-American myself, obviously, and the sort of sexual in-betweenness as well. These aspects of the book, and just trying to navigate, I think, those things between the immigrants and the first generations, and trying to navigate, I think, identity while having a sexual identity, while having a kind of more conservative culture within you, and living in a culture that's more accepting of that, but also feeling really close to the culture that's within you, that's more conservative. So yeah.
It's such a good question, and it's one I think probably a lot of readers will have, because as I've told you, like it just reading the book felt as close to reality at certain times as anything I've read. Like my reality, it was particularly like the wedding scene. There were these scenes where that feeling of being an in-between person, I think is usually done in these kinds of, hype, sort of big bright lights, like box office movie, types of renderings. And it's just, it gets at the psychological experience. It's a much more quiet and dark.
I'm glad you said that, because I think that's the point. That's exactly what I wanted it to do, was to get at the psychological level, right? And so like, it's almost like the plot points, it's not a plot driven novel. I mean, like the plot points are often very everyday, but it's more about that inner psychology that I guess I'm interested in. And maybe that's why I think it feels, because of the fact that there aren't these, like, it's not like it takes place on a bus that's going to explode if it goes below 50 or something. Like there aren't these like major like plot points, right? That maybe that's why it feels.
There's no aesthetic details about the wedding given, right? It's not about that.
Yeah. So the stakes are psychological. Like, yeah.
Zaina, you're so amazing, and I can't wait to read this. Novels are built one sentence at a time. Thinking in terms of style/aesthetics, what were some of the qualities that you strove for at the sentence level? What makes a beautiful, powerful, and/or effective sentence, in your opinion? Who are some of your favorite stylists in the literary world?
I hate names. It's like the worst. I always forget names when it comes to these sort of questions.
Let's start at the sentence level. Yeah. What makes a beautiful sentence? An effective sentence?
I think sentences are beautiful when they contain, I mean, I think they're beautiful sometimes taken together, like in a paragraph, for example. Like, so I guess like I think about the rhythm of the sentences when you read them out loud in the paragraph. I think about where the words are located in the sentence versus like, the punctuation of the sentence, or if there is punctuation marks within the sentence, if there are commas or not. So like, I guess I mean, sentences are really important to me, and it's hard when you're writing a novel because there's so many, and you have to let go of the fact that some sentences are just going to have to do work to like move the story along. You can't just obsess over every sentence the way you can with like a short story or an essay. And I love sentence. I mean, every writer that's here knows, right? Sentences are, you love your sentence, you love sentences. So I just think that, I think about the sentences, especially in writing this book, in the larger context of like a paragraph or a page. And I always read them out loud and just hear the sound of them and, the word choice, if it fits with the moment and the tone and the, the voice. So yeah, I have many favorite sentence smiths. And like, I don't know, Garth Greenwell is like a sentence genius. And I don't know, love his sentences, and I really like Otessa Moshfa's sentences as well, actually. So yeah, there are many more.
This is a question I was wondering as well. How did you balance wanting to include Arabic words and phrases with providing translations so that non-Arabic speakers would understand?
I think
There was one word, mratab. I'm mratab. You're
Imratab,
a
yeah.
guy, like a cute guy, and I looked it up and couldn't find a translation, and it's not translated. But yeah, it was,
Imratab means like, okay, so the translations happened, I think, when they needed to. Like if the word is essential to the plot of the story, then like I would offer a translation. If it wasn't, then I might just trust that the reader can just accept that they don't understand the word, and that's fine, but it's, you know, fits with what the character or the revealed, it fits with the character. And there are some words that have so much more meaning than can be translated, like mrattab. Mrattab, I mean, I'm just laughing thinking about if there are any Arabs here, because they all know what mrattab means, especially when applied to like a guy, you know. He's mrattab, which means that he's like put together, you know, he's like presentable, he like went to J. Crew and bought like all the clothes that were on that front table, and like he did a good job, that like, you know, so yeah, mrattab.
I've been searching for that word.
He probably like owns an apartment, like, you know, he has a down payment, and like, yeah, so yeah, mrattab.
I was wondering if you ever think of the lives of women in the Gulf are more privileged. I'm having a little trouble with this one. I'm gonna move on to.
Okay. Yeah, because I don't know about the Gulf.
Someone's given me another definition here.
Sure.
Go. What are your hopes for the book as it makes its way out in the world? What are your fears for it?
I mean, of course, my fears are that it will be misunderstood or misread, or like, you know, it'll be critiqued for what it isn't rather than for what it is. There'll be like desire for it to be a different book, like a book that like tells a story about like, you know, all of Palestinian history. Why doesn't it do that? Or why, like, so those are fears that I have for the book. Of course, you know, I'm a human and I'm a sensitive one, and so I fear, you know, what any writer fears, I guess, or I shouldn't speak for all writers, but I fear criticism, but I'm also, I can engage with it, and I can really appreciate like good criticism, I suppose, and I've toughened up a lot. And my hopes for it, it's a great question. I mean, my hopes honestly are that like it allows people to see various aspects of their experiences reflected, and reflected in a way that might be soothing or comforting, or at least makes them feel seen. And that it maybe does do what my initial goal was when I first arrived to writing at all, which was to like tell a different story about Arabs and Palestinians in particular, and to subvert a dominant narrative, and, you know, also to do so for other identities that this character embodies, but like, you know, but so yeah, that's really a goal. That's a hope.
The earlier question about how memoiristic is this, do you have any fears around people presuming things about you or your family in this question of, you know, what will people think, that, you know, I think this is a big hurdle that a lot of writers of any ethnicity face, but certainly there are some where it's more heightened.
In the same way, sorry, I just interrupted you.
No.
In the same way that I couldn't control a global pandemic, like getting in the way of my book, or just happening right at the time that it did. I can't control, unfortunately, or I can't control people's perceptions and what they think. You know, it's a novel, it's fiction. And like the rest is up to them.
Yes.
So yeah.
And we should have ended on the note before, which was a more upbeat one.
No, I kind of like the glow.
Okay, we'll go down. Yeah, let's go down. But I think, yeah, we're just about done.
Can I just say to everyone who's here, because I may be slow, Thank you so much. It has meant so much to me having you here. I'm just, my heart is touched. Thank you. And Mallika, thank you.
Oh,
This
thank you for
conversation,
having me, Zaina. This was
amazing. You have no idea. You have no idea how this was perfect. And Greenlight, thank you. Chelsea, thank you so much. Truly. Yeah.
Thank you both so much for tonight's absolutely wonderful conversation, and thank you to everyone who showed up tonight and is showing so much love in the chat for Zaina. A reminder that tonight's event has been recorded, so if you missed any part of it or you had friends or family who had to miss it, keep an eye out for it on our social channels and YouTube later on. And a reminder that you can buy Zaina's book, You Exist Too Much, through greenlightbookstore.com. And if you buy by July 16th, you can get 15% off with code EXIST. Thanks so much again, everyone, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Thank you, and thank you to Greenlight for hosting this.
Greenlight, thank you. My favorite in Brooklyn. I love you guys, really. So
Thank you.
can't wait to come to the store.
Yes. Bye.
Bye.